Skink by Carl Hyacin, Chapter 10. The Chocowachity River was wide and sleepy-looking. We stood on the Road 20 bridge gazing down at the brown water, swollen by hard summer rains. Lush trees lined the banks, and a pair of ospreys coasted back and forth, searching for mullets. Mom says we got 3 days, and then she's calling the cops. Ha! Plenty of time, the governor said. A large fish made a splash by the pilings, and Skink declared it was a sturgeon. They jump like lunatics during mating season. One of them demolished a jet ski a few years back. That I'd pay to see. You sure this is the right place? I am. He peered down at something, shielding his good eye from the sun. Stay here, he told me. Where are you going? For a dip. With surprising agility, he crossed to the end of the span and descended the steep, grassy slope toward the base of the bridge. For a few moments, I lost sight of him among the concrete pillars. When he emerged, I noticed that he'd removed his leg splint and kicked off both his boots. Into the river he went, and that's when I saw what he'd seen, a long, whitish shape on the bottom. An angled light gave it a haze, spooky glow. I hurried down to the shoreline, but I was too freaked out to jump after him. Useless is the word for it. I actually turned away and threw up. The governor drove 3, 4, 5 times. When his head popped to the surface, he sounded like a creaky old manatee sucking air. I folded into a heap on the ground and waited for the sky to stop spinning. It was more than fear that paralyzed me. It was pure dread. Skink sloshed out of the river, panting. His hair was slicked and his silver beard glistened. I practically choked on the question. Is that it? Yep. You checked the license tag? Tag's been yanked off. Is she... Nobody's inside, son, not a soul. You're 100% sure it's the same one? Did you look at the back windshield? There's a pellet hole. There's also a big rock on the accelerator. He located the tire tracks where the bogus Talbot Chalk had sent the stolen Toyota rolling into the Chocowachity. Now the submerged car was obscured by a milky cloud of mud, stirred by Skink's exploration. But you didn't see Mally, I asked in a thick voice. You'd tell me if she was down there, right? I'd have her in my arms right now. What about the trunk? You look in there? It made me sick to think about it, but I had to know. I popped the trunk, Skink said patiently. Nothing but a spare tire and some soggy Bibles. The preacher's stash, no doubt. So Mally's still alive? My guess is they got a boat, which meant they were probably moving downriver. If they were 2 miles from the bridge at dawn, when Mally called, they could be much further now. It all depended on where the fake Talbot intended to go and how fast. Maybe he was searching for a place to hide on the river. We need a boat too, I said, like immediately. The governor smiled and extended a dripping arm toward the ramp on the downriver side of the bridge. A middle-aged man and woman were carefully lifting an aluminum canoe off the top of their minivan. That, Skink said, is what you call destiny. So those people are just going to loan us their canoe? 2 total strangers? Of course not. Please don't tell me we're going to steal it. This is not the movies, Richard. There's a shoebox in the back of the car. Please go and get it while I take a long, glorious leak. The couple was Mr. and Mrs. Capps from Thomasville, Georgia. At first, they were rattled by the strange vision of the governor lurching their way, but before long he charmed them into believing that he was my grandfather. He said we were on a camping trip, but some jerk stole our kayak down in the Apalachicola. Richard was devastated, Skink said. Right, buddy? I tried my best to look devastated. Mrs. Capps patted my shoulder and said it was a cold, rotten world if people went around swiping kids' watercrafts. So true, Skink agreed with a frown. I tried to stop that thug, but he whacked me on the skull with a crowbar and then ran over my foot with his station wagon. He displayed his impressive injuries to Mrs. Capps and his wife, who were outraged. They'd asked if we called the police, and I said yes, of course, but the bad guy still got away. That was my only contribution to the governor's made-up story. Folks, here's the situation, he went on. This is probably our very last river trip together, me and Richard. I'm not getting any younger, and, well, last time I went to the hospital, the MRI didn't look so peachy. It's my lungs. Naturally, Mr. and Mrs. Capps took this to mean the cockeyed old man was deathly ill. I'm so sorry, said Mr. Capps. Except it turned out he was actually Dr. Capps, and he started pressing Skink for details about his medical condition. From the governor's mumbling, it was obvious that he hadn't thought up an actual disease for himself, so I piped up and said, Gramps got emphysema, which is a rough deal, I know. One of my great aunts had it. She smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day for 30 years, and her insides looked like a tar pit. That's Mally's description, not mine. Oh my, said Mrs. Capps. Skink manufactured a sad, sickly cough. Bottom line, I was wondering if you'd be kind enough to sell us your canoe. Dr. Capps looked reluctant. Gosh, I don't know, he said. It's been in the family for years. The governor displayed a roll of cash that he'd taken from the shoebox. The bills were moist and dirty. For all I know, they'd been buried in a graveyard. He held out the money. Here's $1,000. That's how much this trip with my grandson means to me. I'm not sure whose jaw dropped further, mine or the doctor's. Please take it, said Skink. Well, one of Dr. Cap's hands began to reach for the wad, but his wife slapped it down, saying, John, that's way, way too much. We bought that old canoe from your brother for only... Grace, I'll handle this. For heaven's sakes, where's your heart? I didn't make a peep. I was still trying to get my head around the fact that we've been driving around Florida with a shoebox full of money like a couple of dope smugglers. How about 500, the doctor said. Done. The governor slowly peeled off the bills, 25 20s. Mrs. Capps' objections seemed to fade at the sight of all that money, though she worked hard to maintain a compassionate attitude. Oh dear, what's wrong with your eye? She said to Skink. His left socket was leaking some sort of gross fluid that dribbled down into his beard. I know some excellent ophthalmologists, Dr. Capps, if you need a referral. Least of my problems, said Skink. He pried out the fake eye and threw it into the river, where it disappeared with a plop. From a small soiled satchel, he selected a replacement. This one had a sky blue iris and was shaped more like half a clam than a marble. With difficulty and a few cuss words, the governor inserted the glass piece into the pulpy crater under his brow. It's an antique, he explained matter-of-factly, blinking away the ooze. Mortified, the doctor and his wife clambered into the minivan and sped off in a hail of gravel. We carried the canoe to the water and began loading our gear. Skink laughed when I asked if we should bring the gun case. He sprung the latches and took out an ancient golf club with a peeling leather grip. 9-iron, he said, tossing it aboard the canoe. Inside joke. Mr. Tile doesn't trust me with firearms. We buried the shoebox full of cash under a tupela tree. Then we shoved off and paddled downriver. My father used to say that you live most of your life inside your own head, so make sure it's a good space. Easier said than done. There's no off switch on my imagination, and I couldn't stop worrying about what the bogus Talbot Chalk might be doing to Mally. You see so many awful stories in the news, it's hard not to think the worst. Maybe he was just harmless. Mixed-up guy, maybe just a harmless mixed-up guy, or maybe he was a stone criminal. The facts weren't encouraging. He'd stolen a car, sunk it in a river, and disappeared with my cousin. What would I do if I caught him hurting her? All the scenes I imagined had the same violent outcome. I would hurt him worse. In my whole life, I'd never punched anybody, but now I visualized myself going totally psycho, pounding Mally's kidnapper to a bloody pulp. It was pure, crazed anger. But that's what boiled up whenever I thought of him laying a hand on her. In reality, of course, it wasn't me that online Talbot had to fear if we get there before the cops. It was the governor. After that last phone call when Mally had made it clear she wanted to get away, I kept wondering why she couldn't. She was tricky, smarter than almost everybody else I knew. Maybe the dude was able to keep her prisoner because he had a gun or a knife. Possibly he tied her up, though during our conversation it sounded like she was walking around. In my mind, I pictured a basic camping situation. All she had to do was wait for a moment when he wasn't paying attention, then take off running. Mally was super fast, and she could go for miles without stopping. Literally, miles. But now, as the governor and I canoed down the Chakawachiti, the problem with my imaginary escape scenario was obvious. On both sides of the river was a forest covered with the forest cover was thick. The ground pitted and mucky. Once in a while we'd pass a flat, dry clearing or a boat landing, but most of the terrain was dense, tangled, and uneven. A person trying to dash through it would be constantly tripping on vines and stumbling over cypress knees. Mally wouldn't have been able to run at half her cross-country speed without twisting an ankle. The chances for a clean getaway would be slim. She'd also have the disadvantage of not knowing which way through the woods led out. I was kneeling in front of the canoe. Skink was on the back. At first I paddled as hard as I could, causing us to slide and zigzag. I couldn't help myself. I was so torqued up about finding my cousin. Canoes obviously can't go as fast as motorboats, and I was worried about Mally's kidnapper was outpacing us. Skink finally jabbed me with his paddle and told me to save my energy. He said the bogus Talbot was probably looking for a quiet place to lie low on the Chakawachati. For a criminal, the river was a safer place than the highways, he explained. Fewer people and way fewer cops. So I slowed my paddling to match the timing of Skink's stroke. When a big boat went speeding by, we made sure to aim our bow directly into the wake so that the canoe wouldn't swamp. As the sun climbed higher, the breeze quit. Although we kept to the shady side of the river, the air got blistering hot. Whenever we took a break, I limited myself to one gulp of water because we'd brought only 4 small bottles. The mosquitoes were ridiculous, so the governor located a wax myrtle and snatched 2 handfuls of leaves as we glided past. We mashed them up and smeared the paste on our arms and necks and faces. After that, the bugs stayed away. Skink's glass eye fogged up again in the humidity, while his good eye scanned the shorelines for any random motion, any sign of life. Every time we approached a bend in the waterway, we'd get real quiet, in case Online Talbot and my cousin were around the turn. The hours passed slowly. Finally, we stopped at the mouth of a creek, where Skink took out a fishing rod and tied a spinner-type lure on the line. Right away, he caught a nice bass, which he attached to a stringer and trailed behind the canoe. "Dinner," he said. But I couldn't think about eating. I was prepared to paddle until my arms went numb. He landed 2 more fish, and we continued down the river. A little while later, he stopped again, though not to cast for bass. "Look up, Richard. There it is." "What? I don't see anything usual. Look where?" "Hush." We were drifting past a towering dead cypress that was shaped like the mast of a pirate ship. The tree was leaning slightly, and the beards of Spanish moss draped into its bone-colored branches. "That's the tree where I saw the Lord God bird," Skink whispered. "April 17th, 2009. "Sweet," I said, trying to be polite, because honestly, I didn't believe he'd seen a real live ivory bill. Woodpecker holes were visible up and down the trunk of that old cypress, but probably they'd been drilled by other species. Most likely what the governor had spotted that spring morning had been an ordinary pileated. Like so many bird watchers, he was guilty of wishful thinking. The ivory bill was extinct, gone forever. Sad, but true. He was perched up at the very top, right about there, Skink was pointing. We watched each other for a full minute, then he squeaked 3 times and flew away. "Could you see the underwings?" "Clear as day." "And the trailing edges were white?" "What is this, a pop quiz? I know damn well what I saw, and what I saw was an ivory bill." I wasn't going to argue with the man. The only thing that mattered at the moment was Mally. Any other topic was a distraction. A John boat came putt-putting around the bend ahead of us. It had a small outboard engine and 1 person aboard steering with a tiller. He wore a floppy straw hat, a red bandana pulled under his eyes, like a bank robber in the Wild West days. As the motorboat came closer, the driver gave a small wave. Skink called out, "How's fishin'?" The driver turned off the engine and quacked, "What?" I said, "How's the fishin'?" "Lousy." It was a woman, not a man. She tugged down the bandana and lit up a cigarette. I would have guessed her to be in her late 50s, early 60s, and not a fan of dentists. She pointed behind the canoe, where the bass were swirling on a stringer. "I see you fellas had some luck." The governor shrugged modestly. "You want one?" "There's 3 fish and but 2 of us." "Nah, but thanks just the same." "My name is Clint. This is my grandson Richard." "I'm Etta. Pleased to meet ya." "How you fixed for water, Etta?" "I'm good." She turned away to blow some smoke. At this point, I started getting pretty annoyed. Not only was Skink wasting precious time socializing with this person, he was also trying to give away our food and water. So I spoke up, "Gramps, we really ought to get going." He completely ignored me. "Etta, did you go far downriver?" "Couple miles is all." "Reason I ask, we were supposed to meet up with some folks for supper. Richard's cousin and her new boyfriend. Only we don't know exactly where they're at." Etta removed her hat. Her hair was cropped short and dyed the color of copper pennies. She scratched a bare spot on her scalp. "I ran across a young couple down a ways," she said. "Ain't too friendly, though." "Which side of the river?" the governor asked. "Same side we on now. They anchor up in some old houseboat." "Must be them. How far from here?" "Not far at all," she said. "And they've got the anchor out, you say?" "That's right." Could get there by sunset, but I wouldn't bet on it." "Well, we're much obliged." "Like I mentioned, they ain't real friendly. That young man, he give me the evil eye when I waved hello. The female, she just sort of stared." Skink frowned. "That's no excuse for bad manners, is there? There's no excuse for bad manners, is there, Richard?" "No, sir," I said. Then to Etta, "Sorry about that, ma'am. I'll have a talk with her." She was eyeing the snake rattle hanging from my neck. That's one big old diamondback. Yes, ma'am, 18 buttons. She whistled through one of the many gaps in her teeth. What'd you do with his skin? The governor said the rattlesnake was a roadkill. The hide got all tore up. The governor said the rattlesnake was a roadkill. The hide got all tore up. Too bad. Etta jerked the starter cord and the dinky outboard shook to life. Say, where'd you catch them fish? Skink told her about the good Bass Creek. She thanked him and continued upriver. As soon as I took out my cell phone, he asked, What are you up to, son? Calling Detective Trujillo to tell him where Mally is. Except I wasn't calling anybody. My battery was dead, and obviously there was no electrical source on the canoe, no place to plug in a charger. I asked to borrow the governor's cell, which he took from his pants pocket. The same pants he'd been wearing when he jumped into the river to explore the sunken Toyota. You drowned your phone, I said. Truly, he couldn't have cared less. I wasn't real happy. This is bad, dude. I promised my mother I'd call the police as soon as we found Mally. We haven't found her yet. Yeah, but if it's her on that houseboat, and neither of us has a phone that works... Well, we could paddle upriver all the way back to the bridge, Skink said, which would give this jerk some more time alone with your cousin, or we go get her ourselves. Is that plan B? You've always known it was a possibility, Richard. You knew it that night when you got into the car. He was right, honestly. I wasn't too surprised that the hunt for Mally was playing out this way, and that her rescue would depend on just the two of us, a one-eyed hermit with a mangled foot and me. Quite the all-star team. Okay, so how do we do this, I asked. On a full stomach, when we're not bone-tired. The governor picked up his paddle and stroked toward shore. It'll be dark in an hour. Let's make camp. Right now? But we're so close. They'll still be there in the morning. We need to eat and we need to rest, he said. We also need some rules. Really? After all this, there's rules? Well, just one. Which is? Do whatever I tell you. Whenever I tell you. No questions. But, starting now, Richard.